Welcome back to my series on compound mobility. These are movements that address the flexibility and range of motion of more than one joint at a time so that you don't have to spend all day stretching to stay nice and limber. Today we're going to be addressing the lower body and spine, so we will be covering the bodyweight pigeon, internal rotation stretch, side split, pancake, front split and deep lunge, and the weighted pike and Jefferson curl. So let's get started. The bodyweight pigeon is usually cited as a good external rotation stretch for the hip, although it also covers flexion. To do it correctly, you need your knee at 90 degrees and your hip at roughly 90 degrees in front of you to start off, and then you fold forward. You can do this raised up on a bench or on the floor. And if you elevate your back leg or rotate it inwards, that is going to make the exercise more difficult. The internal rotation stretch for the hip comes in 4 different stages that put increasing amounts of leverage on the relevant muscles. So you start out sitting on your butt on the floor with your feet out in front of you and your hands behind you for support. One leg will come forward, and then you will try to get that knee to touch the ground by moving it in towards the midline of the body. This is internal rotation. The other knee should stay pointed towards the ceiling. In the next stage, you're going to do it with your butt just off the floor, then in a table bridge, and then finally you can try doing it in a full table bridge or in a squat. Just find the level that is appropriate for you. It should be uncomfortable but not painful. The side split, when progressed correctly, creates strength and mobility, primarily in the adductors, although it also does to some extent work on other things like ankle stability if it's done right. I do recommend that you start off with the frog stretch if you have never done any kind of side split before. So you can do that just by starting out kneeling on a surface you can slide on. Here you can see I'm using some sliders. Then you try to open your legs, getting them as far away from each other as possible. The more that you do this with your weight over your knees, the more difficult this will be from a strength standpoint, but it will also produce lasting gains in mobility that way. You can obviously use support. This can be your hands by leaning forward or something like that. Although once you've attained a good level of competence there, I do recommend trying to do it with as little support as possible and progressing it that way. If you get to the point where you can do a side split without any external support, then you can start talking about adding weight. The deep lunge is just a precursor for the front split, although it also works on squatting related mobility and ankle range of motion. To perform a deep lunge, just put your foot in front of you. This can be raised up on a surface if you're new to this, or out on the floor if you're a little bit more limber. You want to get your knee as far forward as you can, keeping it over your toes, not out to the sides. And that's about it. The only difference between a deep lunge and a split is whether or not your front leg is bent. If you start to straighten that leg out in front of you, as you can see here, I do that on some sliders, you are working towards a front split. You also can work on the front split by putting your foot up on rings if the front of your knee is injured, which mine has been this week. The pancake stretch is something of a combination stretch, so it gets your hamstrings to some extent, the internal muscles of the hip, and even a little bit of ankle work, especially on the way out of the bottom position. The easiest variation is just in a chair. You get your legs spread out as much as you can without using your hands, so just spread your legs out as much as you can, and then fold forward. To do this optimally, you do want to keep your spine straight. I did this with a bit of a rounded back in this shot, but you do want to keep your spine straight most of the time. Then you can progress to something a little bit lower to the ground, and you can also work on doing it with a little bit of weight, or you can just put your hands overhead. Honestly, the leverage is more than enough for most people. From there, you can progress towards doing it on the floor, with the final result looking something like this. The weighted pike is a great exercise for building strength and mobility in the hamstrings and posterior chain, so the glutes and that entire chain all the way down to the calves. You want to stand with your feet more or less shoulder width. You don't have to put them all the way together, and your knees locked. You want to shoot your hips back behind you, so you're folding at the hips first, not the knees, and not the spine. So hips go back, and then you bend forward. When you run out of room in your hamstrings, then you can get your spine involved. And from there, you just stand back up by driving your heels back. So that is the weighted pike. Obviously, you can add weight to this. The Jefferson Curl is in some ways very similar to the pike, but it's different in terms of how we initiate. So instead of initiating from the hip, we want to initiate from the spine. You start by bending your head forward, curving your back as much as you can the entire way down. And only when you've run out of spine do you start to let your hips go back and you start to get a stretch in the hamstrings. These two complement each other nicely. The Jefferson Curl, I think, probably warrants a little bit more caution just because of the amount of flexion in the spine, although the saying that bending your back or something like that is bad for your spine is really not true. Your spine needs to be flexed and extended, both. So do proceed with the Jefferson Curl. You can do it with weight as well. Just bring up that amount of weight very slowly. That is it. So those were the stretches that I use for the lower body and the spine every week, usually a couple times a week. And yeah, I've seen very good mobility results both on myself and my clients with these. So feel free to give them a shot. Let me know in the comments if you have any problems, if you have any questions, what you guys think about these, if you think that there are some compound stretches that I missed for the lower body or the back. And yeah, see you in the next video. Bye.